Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the latest controller from M Audio, the Axiom Air. This is the 61 key version we've got, and there are others in the range, as with the previous models. In fact, the Axiom Air replaces the Axiom Pro range, which was the previous sort of flagship. And we must remember that M Audio have occupied the MIDI controller area of manufacture for quite some time. I mean, they were pretty much the only game in town for quite a while, and they've got a number of controllers across the entire sort of strata and pricing structure of it. I'd say the Axiom is probably it is the higher end of that range. So this is the Air 61 that we have here. That is in fact the old Axiom 61, which I've used a lot in the studio. Actually, this has been my kind of keyboard of choice just for controllers and doing reviews and what have you. And the Air has a very similar number of features, but the layout is completely different. So starting on the left here, we've got 8 rotary encoders. These are actually very interesting because we've got multiple layers of these, as with all of the controls on the Axiom. On the MIDI bank, so we've got a red layer, which is bank 1, a green layer, which is bank 2, and a kind of orangey layer, which is bank 3. These are all individually assignable and can send on a number of different parameters. There's also 2 hypercontrol levels, which will come into function when this is hooked up to hypercontrol savvy software. Then coming along here, we've got this kind of console style LCD display. Then we come along to the faders. Again, 3 banks plus hypercontrol plus the mute switches, which are all totally assignable. Nice to see that there are 8 plus a fader, which you can have a bank of 8 plus a master, which I really like. Then we're coming along here to the pads. The pads, 16 pads, velocity and pressure sensitive. Again, 3 MIDI banks. So we've got 3 times 16, which is what, 48, I believe, plus a roll feature. And when pressing the roll, then the quantized value is set by pressing one of these. Then at the top here, we've just got a few more numeric entry points on the keyboard. Coming back down here, pitch and mod wheel, nice bright and big octave plus and minus. The keyboard, and it's got actually a really nice positive feel. The thing I found with the original Axiom keyboard of that sort, it was a bit sluggish, so for triggering beats it wasn't quite so hot, and I'm still very much the person who likes to use the keyboard just so I get a lot of voices across the keys. And it's got a really nice feel, a sort of very positive, sort of slightly sprung, and it's got aftertouch as well, I must remember, they're not polyphonic. So around the back here you get an idea of the sort of sense of the shape of the Axiom. It's very sort of Stormtrooper, if you're a fan of Star Wars. Connections are just here, this kind of back panel. Starting off with, you've got a Kensington lock, sustain pedal input and expression pedal, MIDI in and out, which are sort of additional ports to the USB MIDI interface, which obviously we're bus powering this, and this is the USB port. Then we've got a 9-volt DC input and a power switch. That's pretty much it for connections. So a lot of controls there, certainly 2 more banks than on the original Axiom. The fact that they're also switchable independently, pads, faders and knobs, is also pretty cool, so you can mix and match. The only problem is though, the backlight behind the MIDI bank switch on each of the sections is very dim. It needs to be a bit more strident so you can see whether you're in green, orange or red. I couldn't really make it out, to be honest. I mean, the knobs, when they're selected, they light up so you can see that, but if you're not, then you just can't see it, and that's operationally perhaps a bit of an issue with so many controls at your disposal. So let's take a look at the inner workings and how you assign this stuff in the keyboard. So let's say I want to edit the controller value for this knob number 4 on bank 1. Perhaps I might go for, let's say, knob number 4 on bank 2, which is currently set to controller value 19. I hit the edit button, then I select my knob. It tells me bank 2, knob 4. Then I have to hit parameter assign, which is D on the keyboard. Hit that. It gives me the opportunity to dial in the MIDI controller number. I've also got the opportunity for registered parameter numbers and non-registered parameter numbers, which are 2-bit, basically bits of data, which you could use for accessing additional parameters. We'll go back to controller here, MIDI CC. Now I'm going to hit the right arrow, controller number, and this is where knob 8 comes into play here, and this is the lights up and I can dial in the number I want. It's actually a little bit fiddly. It's hard to get exactly the right number. It does sort of jump around a bit. It'd be nice to have some up and down keys here for changing that value, but I don't get the opportunity. I've set it to controller 14. Now I press this button in the middle and it's assigned. Now I can just save my memory and so on and so forth. I must say, it's a little bit clunky on the operating system, but it's still far better than the Axiom 61 and presumably the Axiom Pro. I haven't actually had a chance to change that, so it is kind of an improvement. You can obviously assign all the faders, all the knobs across all the banks. Buttons allow you to toggle between momentary or toggle behavior. You can also send note values on there. And the drum pads are also assignable. You can assign a MIDI note and a controller for the pressure, and that can be independent for each pad. The thing about pads for me is I find it a real faff to actually, program them up. There is a bit of a shortcut which is quite handy, and I'll go to that now. So I hit edit and I've got my pad selected, pad 1, bank 1. Then I go to pad learn, which is C on the keyboard, and I can just play any note in and then just hit enter, and it's assigned straight away, which is actually a great shortcut. It means you don't have to scroll through lots of knobs and you can set them up quickly. But what I'd really like is to have like a chromatic override for the pads. So for instance, if I went into chromatic mode, say there's a button here, I could then transpose, and it means I can just access very quickly any voice that I could also access on the keyboard. We should also take a look at the hypercontrol aspect of this keyboard, and this is M-Audio's protocol for, well, it's a similar concept as something like Novation's AutoMap, where you load software, you load plugins, and the parameters are reflected in the LCD window. There's also specific control of things like transport and what have you. You don't have to set that all up. So let's take a look at it. The first thing to do is head over to M-Audio's website and download the drivers. Air 61, I'm on, it says 10.75 is the highest supported. I'm actually working with 10.6.8, so it does work on that. You've also got Windows drivers, 7 and 8, 32 and 64-bit. Then you just download the package that you need. We've got hypercontrol for Logic and Cubase. It actually, you think there would be more, but actually a lot of these are supported out of the box and don't need additional drivers, so that's why. I then downloaded it. So now I go over to Logic where I've got it all set up, and it's really just a matter of once you have it in there, it shows up as a control surface as native. It basically just works. So now I've got it all plugged in. It really was no trouble whatsoever. And I just press play, my transport control works. Pressing the hyper control button here, the mix button, toggles between volume and sends. So if we go into volume, you can see my faders are working there. Go into send mode. Let's select this channel here, which is now in solo. I can toggle between these, and this gives me solo, mute, or record ready. We're in solo, mute, and then I'm going to go to hyper control, say for instance, and go for sends. Add a bit of see, I might be able to scroll that down and be able to see those sends being operated. More reverb. Doctor, just what the doctor orders. So that all works nice. Only shows the name of the instrument, not the track name in Logic. I guess if I renamed my actual objects, then it would show up here. Let's just try that. So if I go into Logic, rename that, say Beats 1, and yeah, it does, it updates that. We also get the opportunity to work with plugins as well. I'm going to use this side here. So again, I've got hyper control, allows me to switch on the mix button, go between pan and volume and sends, pan, volume and sends. Then I'm going to go into instrument effects, and that, just pressing it, brings up the currently selected tracks. In this case, it's instrument. So if I press play now, you can hear it's like a sort of 303 type sound. You can see it brings up the name of the parameter, which is the mix of the waveform. And then I've got my cut off and what have you. So it gives me the ability, I press it again, and the next plugin in line happens to be a distortion drive. So I can give that a bit more editing. The only thing I did find is there are actually other plugins in the chain, and pressing it again just seems to flip between the instrument and the first one in line. And I found with this was the same no matter what tracks I selected. So if I go here, I maybe scroll along to another Now I scroll on to another track, I hit hyper control, I've got my ES2 and a compression, but there's also an EQ here which is not showing up. And it doesn't matter which section of hyper control I'm using, whether it's the faders or the pots, I only get, you know, say the instrument and the next one in line, and that's kind of I guess that must be a bug. So it's not perfectly integrated, but it certainly goes a whole way further, and you don't need any special kind of plugins with special wrappers, so it's a very repeatable experience in a lot of ways. So one other thing to mention is we haven't gone into zones and splits on this, and that's because there are no zones and splits. It's just one channel, one key span, and that's actually quite a big difference from previous Axioms where you had up to 4 zones and you could set the upper and lower and overlaps and layered certain MIDI channels on top of each other. All that's kind of gone really, but what you do get is much more layers of control instead, so banking of controls. And for some people that's going to be a major no-no, because if they're using this live and they need, you know, certain sounds up here and certain sounds down there, if they have to program it all in software or via their various different devices, then that's a bit more of a faff really. But as a keyboard in itself, very nice feel. I like the additional controlling. Hyper control is certainly a welcome addition, if not perhaps perfect, and it's really down to pricing. So here I've got it 389 for the 61, 329 for the 49, and 249 for the Air 25. Now obviously this doesn't have any faders on it, it's just got knobs and pads. So still quite a premium cost for the Axiom Air range. There are cheaper alternatives out there, but the keybed does have a really nice feel to it. I found it was really a great improvement over the Axiom Air original, which I think we'll be sticking on eBay. The additional level of control, the multiple banking and hyper control, while not fully there, is still very useful and certainly doesn't get in the way. I think the only real downside is if you need to have zones and splits, then you're kind of stuck. You really are going to have to go elsewhere. But if you're a player and just want something that you can play and have a lot of control, then the Axiom Air is well worth looking at.